This is the Lasgidi Farmer Podcast.
Today, initially, we had a discussion on GMO. It was with a professor from the University of Ibadan, Professor Olugbenga Adeoluwa. So we discussed the GMO conversation within, Nigeria itself. So I saw that there was need to consider issues beyond Nigeria, Africa, and also looking at what is happening in the West, looking at Northern America, and especially in America. And I saw that you were doing a fantastic job there. You've been giving out educative content, and helping to enlighten people using your platform, GMO Science, right? So just said that we need to have you here. And, I find that what you do is very interesting because it focuses on children, environmental well-being, and, sustainability. So I just thought to have you here today. So if you want to give us a brief introduction about yourself, that would be nice.
Toheeb, thank you, first of all, for having me and for certainly care about Nigerian children, environment, and Nigerian adults, too. So a little bit of myself. I am a pediatrician. I started as an emergency pediatrician, and then I morphed into environmental health when I learned about GMOs and pesticides, and I connected that with the rise in autism spectrum disorder in the U.S., approximately in the early 2000s. I then later wrote a book about what's making our children sick, focused on GMOs and their associated pesticides. You don't eat a GMO alone. And that was about 10 years ago. And then I just released another book for parents on how to get them well, making our children well. In 2014, I co-founded, and now I am the CEO of the website. It's a nonprofit, GMOscience.org. We developed to label GMOs so people can decide what they want to eat. We were defeated by big ag, big food, big money, big government. And our federal government came in and blanketed labeling. We have some labeling now, but the language is so hard for the average consumer to understand because they use green terminology. That's my history. I run a Substack. I do talks, and I've cared for lots of chronically ill children during my almost 45 years seeing kids.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for that. It's such an interesting profile. I'm sure that we have a lot of insightful things to learn from you today. Let's just quickly unpack, what is happening today, regarding GMOs, associated pesticide, and their correlated disorder. They are so extensive. So I hope that we are able to do justice to these themes, topics in the time frame. So I want you to let us know what is the current state of food, health, and environmental system in the US, North America. How is like, are they tipping over? Is there a deliberate attempt to sabotage this system? A lot of issues are emanating from the US these days, and we are in Nigeria. We also have our issues, toxic chemicals in food, misleading labels, mRNA vaccines and heart attack, wildlife and biodiversity loss. We are having industrial waste, water fluoridation, data center and solar panel, all this. And the recent one, the president of the United States, Glyphosate executive order. What do you think about all these things? What's the state of the food, health, and environmental system in the US?
Certainly. It's an excellent question. Great place to start the conversation. I'm gravely, extremely, profoundly concerned about the status of our food here in the U.S. We have evolved from the introduction of GMOs back in 1996, similar to actually Africa in the South. I believe it was South Africa introduced the GMOs in 1997, very close to the U.S., same problems as we have. We've morphed the original GMO program from just injecting certain gene qualities, i.e. resistance to Roundup, those are glyphosate-based herbicides. They further advanced to something called genetic engineering and CRISPR technology, where they were using these genetic scissors to realign DNA pieces to create entirely new foods, like the Impossible Burger, which is a plant-based genetically modified burger from these genetically modified soy nodules to taste like beef. It's a disaster. And their stock is falling. We've now morphed further into what I call GMOs 3.0 super advanced synthetic biology. They call it precision fermentation. There's nothing precise, and it's not fermentation. This is not like eating fermented foods like sauerkraut or kefir or kimchi or whatever cultural foods that are fermented. This is a totally new collection of DNA from unrelated microbes, organisms, plants. They use a lot of yeast to create a host of new proteins and new molecules that the human body has never seen. A paper just came out by a colleague of mine, which showed that this synthetic milk, they advertise it as plant-based milk for people who are sensitive to dairy, that it has 293 or some odd new proteins in it that we've never seen before, that we don't even know what they do. These substances can change our entire biology. So not only that, we have this design certainly happening now in the US, where they want us to be eating these synthetic foods and coming off high protein diets to be eating crickets, for example. Crickets in some countries are a staple. However, crickets are great for your chickens, great food for chickens, but they're filled often with parasites. So, and we do not have the chemistry designed to break down the exoskeleton of crickets, by the way. And now they're introducing crickets into meal of different foods here in the US. So, but anyway, the other problem is all these foods have their associated pesticides. I remind your listeners, pesticides include herbicides, insecticides, fungicides. They are biocides, kill life. That's what it means. And to think that, Jane Goodall said it, to think that it was a good idea to poison our food supply and then eat it, not so smart. So these pesticides, what they don't do, study what happens when you eat more than one simultaneously. They study one at a time. So this is called negative synergism, and they have a way more toxic effect. And we can go into that further if you like.
Oh, that's really interesting. I see that we are having to deal with a whole lot of issues here. For the amateur or those that are not too scientific, they might not be able to understand all this. And I see that the meaning, definition of what GMO is ever expanded, right? To connect all this together, we'll still come back to that. In the light of all these issues, I'd like to, ask you my other question, why you pursue this great career that spans over 40 years in acute and integrative medicine, right? So focusing on children's well-being, environmental health, and pesticide and GMO advocacy. A lot of intentional mis and disinformation and frustration of effort keep emerging and wasn't stronger, like you previously mentioned. Yet you have one of the most educative, detailed, and updated resources, right? And which is the GMO science on these issues, helping to clear the path and ensure justice. So it must take a whole lot of resources, mental energy and fun. So I'd like to ask you that what is so important about this course that it just had to be initiated and continued at all costs?
What's driving my persistent writing, education, research, understanding for our children is that chronic diseases in children are exploding. I don't want to say escalating or rising. I would say exploding. So just within my lifetime, there has been a tsunami of not just one disorder, many disorders, because they are linked. The body is not a separate collection of organs. Everything is linked together. So explosion of neurology, we call them neurocognitive disorders, metabolic disorders, anything from obesity to type 1, type 2, type 3 diabetes, issues with learning, many ADHD, children with dyslexia, every type of learning challenge. We have massive GMOs and pesticides also cause nutrition deficiencies. So the children don't have the nutrients to run their physiology. So all these things matter. Our children are sicker. It's happened in front of me, within my own eyes, my own career, my own patients. The other problem is there are certain kind of health practices used here, let's say in the US. We call it mainstream or Western medicine or conventional medicine. Those physicians, I was one, are not trained to manage those complex chronically ill children, nor are they trained to understand the root causes of what's driving those chronic diseases in children, which are toxicants, environmental toxicants. What's making our children sick are not so much infections, but toxins. And those toxins include pesticides, toxic metals, plastics, PFAS, electromagnetic frequencies, etc. It's a toxic soup. Our kids are not mini adults, and they do not have the detoxification, the ability to clear these multiple, I would say, poisonous substances. So it's overloaded, and they're not doing very well. So that is what drove me to do it, why I continue to do it, and to present to you as best I can. When I understand the research, I combine it to a study. When I say something's anecdotal, based on my experience in my own clinic, I say that as well. And often you won't see the research because research is often done in university settings that are owned by industry. They're not going to do research, which is often expensive, against themselves. So we have known that not just university settings, research settings, media is controlled by the very industry that we're trying to report on. It's a corrupt system. And who suffers? Our children, our wildlife, our environment. And that's why I keep reporting.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mitchell. I like that your submission did not only touch on, why you embark on this great cause, but also touch on why it's important for children and also talking a bit about the corrupt system. But before I go on to the next question, we have quite some people, saying hello in the comment section. Barrick said goodbyes back in 1991 to all fast foods. Thank goodness. And we also have TJ Adding saying, hi, hello, James, thank you. Thomas, most toxicity is worse. And someone is asking, we are from Nigeria, and Dr. Mitchell is from the US, having conversation about how to make our food system, global food system, safe, secure, and for our children, right? So I move on to the next question. You've rightly talked about why, this is important, that it had to be done for children. But I want us to focus on the Nigerian and African children, which the focus of today's conversation is. So I would like to ask you that why should these modified organisms and pesticides be of particular concern for tropical continents as Africa and country as Nigeria and their infants? I know that you've touched on this in your book, but I want you to expatiate on that. Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. What Nigerian children face may not be the same as what U.S. children or Chinese children or Ukrainian children face, right? There are definitely significant regional differences. In preparing for this podcast with you, I had to relook at what's happening in Nigeria. I've never been to your beautiful country. One day I hope to visit. So I'd say, let's take a look, shall we? Well, the statistics in Nigeria are not so good. I was hoping to read something more affirming, but there were some concerns that I saw when I looked at your policy on food production. Certainly, Nigeria embraced GMOs and pesticides in 2018 full on. And it sounds like that for those who were trying to protest the introduction of GMOs and pesticides were targeted in your country. And a lot of money came from the U.S., I am sorry to say, from agencies. I read USAID and other agencies, and a significant amount of money poured in so that GMOs could flow into Nigeria. Additionally, Nigeria is just about to launch, or I think may have already launched, 6 new GMO crops, everything from BT cotton to cowpeas to maize, there are crops total, and that are being introduced. So when you introduce all these new crops, you introduce their associated pesticides. How is this affecting your children? Well, it appears that Nigerian children have health challenges, everything from rising rates of neurocognitive issues, that's learning challenges, and autism spectrum. Issues with obesity rising as you adopt more ultra-processed foods made from GMOs and pesticides and move away from your traditional diets. And as we introduce foods that are contaminated, like cowpeas that are GMO, they will be introduced right into your foods and people will not know because they're not labeled. Additionally, in Nigeria, you're using pesticides that were banned in Europe and the US, and we don't ban many pesticides in here in the US. But Europeans are sending, as well as Americans, are sending more toxic pesticides to African countries, Nigeria included, that have been shown to be deadly to children. Not just Roundup, which are glyphosate-based herbicides, but even more toxic pesticides like the organophosphates. Those are insecticides. There was one report I read, it was in Nigeria, it was in South Africa, where 6 children died after drinking turbufos, which is an organophosphate, which blocks their nervous system. They drank it like a soda bottle, thinking it was soda. Lots of times people put chemicals in bottles that are familiar to children and they can drink them. The amount needed for harm is so small. And that is one that is used in I think, I'm not sure if Nigeria uses it, but certainly used in South Africa. I believe it was Soweto, where 6 children died. And there's treatment for it if you get to them quickly. It's atropine, but it doesn't matter. This is a non-sustainable situation. So you're ramping up production. We have infiltrated Nigerian government, the U.S., to give you money. You're bringing out more GMOs, making it forced upon your communities, and organizations like GMO Free Nigeria Alliance, I believe it's called, and there are other organizations. I don't know how successful they are and how much opposition and censorship they're receiving. But I don't believe the Nigerian children are faring well with the changes in your food supply.
Okay, so Dr. Mitchell, you just brought out another combination of chemicals that is disastrous, right? And I was going to ask you before the combination of, glyphosate, fluoride, and aluminium. So that one is a different combination entirely, right? We are soon going to get into that. But let's, still on INFAT, you have exposed to the genetically developed alternative to natural oligosaccharides found in human milk, important for healthy microbe culture for infants. So how the artificial HMOs is not the same as and could even constitute risks, but they are more about in Nigeria. There is issue around this milk. There are several reports on the formula, but they are more about backdating expiry dates, dilution of ingredient, and attending, malnutrition and absence of antibodies and essential enzyme. But that particular issue of HMOs is not relevant or is not being addressed. So I want you to enlighten us on, what do you think are the hidden and prolonged challenges that this could have been causing for Nigeria, in fact, that we didn't know just because we are not addressing.
So the issue has to do with feeding infants. Feeding infants is not a casual thing. That food that infants receive set up their immune system literally for life. Hopefully, mother is breastfeeding the baby, and I honestly say I don't know the rates of breastfeeding in Nigeria. In the U.S., for example, by 6 months of age, over half of women in America stop breastfeeding and give their babies infant formula. I don't know what the statistic is in Nigeria, but I imagine it's shifting because of the influence of companies like Nestle promoting infant formula over the best milk is breast milk. However, if moms are exposed to pesticides or working in the fields, all those pesticides will get in the breast milk. They themselves may not develop issues, but the infants will, and subsequent generations will as well. And we've got good research on that. Now, in the breast milk, there is a food that a mom makes specifically for a certain germ that babies need called bifidobacteria. They're called human milk oligosaccharides, or HMOs. Now, if those HMOs are not there, like in formula, you cannot feed this crucial microbe that babies need. Now, what formula companies are doing is they're putting some HMOs into infant formula. However, those HMOs they're putting into infant formula are genetically modified. And they're not studying the long-term effects of giving babies these altered germs in the formula, which then can interact with the baby's own germs, and they can swap genetic information. Yes, the bugs have sex, and they're swapping their DNA and creating new microbes. We have no idea what they do. We have no idea what they produce. We have no idea of long-term outcome, and it's not been studied. That's one thing. The water contamination is a whole separate issue. I don't believe Nigeria fluoridates the water. And Tohib, you'll have to bring me up to speed on that. If Nigeria fluoridates, then we've got bigger problems.
Okay, I don't really think Nigeria fluoridates because we don't have like this state channeled water. Is usually individual from house to house borehole. I think it's more of chlorinated than fluorination, right? And thank you for that explanation on HMO. So I was just going to ask you a question of the book. Before, when we look at allergies like allergic rhinitis and also asthma, right? We see it as okay, it's hereditary, but this line of thinking and this new thought that you bring now is informing that we could actually have allergies that are not hereditary, but just due because of the imbalance of the microbes and impairing of the immune system at the early infant stage could cause this. Is this true?
Yes, that is true. So one of some of the things that take out the microbiome in mom and then baby are antibiotics. Glyphosate is an antibiotic patented by Monsanto, now Bayer, in 2003 and then officially in 2010. Not only is glyphosate an antibiotic, it's an excellent antibiotic, and it wipes out the key microbes. In the 1930s, there was a dentist from the US named Weston A. Price, and he studied many indigenous peoples of Africa. And he found, this dentist, that the amount of cavities and dental issues in Africans as compared to Americans was almost non-existent. They didn't have it. And it was because the diet. They did not eat a sugary, ultra-processed food diet, and they had a very robust microbiome. As countries in Africa adopt a higher sugar content, more ultra-processed foods, and steer away from their local foods, as well as poison their own crops now with the same stuff we're eating here in the US, your diets have changed, your microbiome has changed, your chemistry changes, and even something called your epigenetics change. Just in the 1930s, only 100 years ago, the African people had some of the best microbiomes in the world. And now I am sad to say, I hope you've now adopted more of a Western profile because of what's been imposed upon your culture by American industry.
I mean, these are emerging disorders to, acceptance of foreign food and foreign culture, if I would say. But I'll move on to the next question. Let's try to establish, the connection, like I've touched on before, fluoride, aluminium, and glyphosate. We've established that glyphosate can be antibiotic, right? But glyphosate can react with aluminium and fluoride to become something else. And that was what you were, alluding at in your book. Could you expatiate on that?
Certainly. This came about, Tohi, because I was giving a lecture on fluoride. America fluoridates its water. And what I did was about 73% of American water is fluoridated, okay? Now, this is also true for chlorine. It's not just fluorine, fluoride. Chlorine also can bind aluminum and glyphosate, by the way. Yes, so African people are also a problem. But what I started to do is I said, well, wait a minute. There is glyphosate in all of our air, all of our food, all of our water. We are ubiquitously saturated with glyphosate here in the US. So can these chemicals bind? And so there is aluminum in the soil, but here in the US, it may be happening in Nigeria, they are dropping aluminum in geoengineering in the sky. We have crops, we have foods that are contaminated with aluminum. We know that glyphosate and aluminum can join together. Glyphosate can shuttle the aluminum across your blood-brain barrier, that protection across your brain, which is very poorly developed until about 1 year of age, 6 different ways. It appears that glyphosate can also bind aluminum and fluoride or chloride or iodide. These are all a group of chemicals called halogens. Now, they make a very stable compound. It's called a ternary compound. It doesn't matter for your science geeks, but that compound can cross the blood-brain barrier. Also, it can get deposited in the kidney. What we're seeing now in farmers who do chemical spraying is rampant kidney disease. It is rampant here in Central America, in sugarcane workers that are fluoridated, aluminum toxic, glyphosate exposed, as well as Sri Lanka. And I read that there were farmers in Africa, maybe I don't remember which country it was in Africa, who also are having kidney disease and only one center for renal dialysis, which is a terrible, terrible thing to have. Chronic kidney failure it's a very bad health issue. Dialysis is awful for people. And I can't remember where. And that could be explaining why. Now, you said, Michelle, do you have proof? Absolutely not. I have the issues, I have the chemicals, I have the input, and I need somebody with money to do the research. Now, do you think industry is going to do this research? I don't think so.
Oh, thank you so much for that, Dr. Mitchell. When we look at the individual elements themselves, there are controversies over them. Glyphosate, fluoride in toothpaste, aluminium in our food, using aluminium foil has been linked to different cancerous diseases. Fluoride, also its effect on the immune system, the pineal gland, and also glyphosate, nervous disorders, and all that. So when we are having combination of all these three together, it's kind of scary, right? And we'll leave it at that. Let's discuss about the elephant in the room, and Dr. Mitchell, which is the GMMS, that's the genetically modified microbes. When we talk about GMOs, there is limited understanding of what is it. You were talking about gene sharing not quite long. So I'm not sure if you've come across this, that recently there's been allegations that the introduction of GM ginger in Nigeria is responsible for the nation's ginger production collapse. So we used to export yearly before 26 billion naira worth of ginger. All of a sudden, it's all collapsed now. So there's been allegation that is related to the adoption of GM ginger. So some have argued that this collapse is not related to GM ginger, that is false, and that GM ginger was never introduced to Nigeria. But others have also argued that it wasn't about GM ginger, but introduction of modified microbes into the soil, that destroyed the soil health and impacted ginger health. So I want to ask you, this context, it embodies the extended term of GMMS, that is often hidden and unknown, in which you alluded to in your work. Could you enlighten us on this, the gene sharing and the less level threats this carries?
Yes, certainly. So regarding your ginger, I wasn't aware that ginger is genetically modified. However, a crop can fail completely, even if it's not GMO, if there is glyphosate in the soil. There was a paper that came out last year that happened in Canada. It's called Saga of the Soggy Sauerkraut, that there was this $1 million cabbage production and sauerkraut all lost because there was undisclosed glyphosate in the soil that killed off the microbes in the soil, and it thus decimated the crop. Millions of dollars and sauerkraut lost. It is completely possible, and I'd say most likely, that the ginger production failed because of chemical contamination of your soil. If the soil gets killed off, the rhizomes, the mycorrhiza, the microbes in the soil, the plants can't extract the nutrients they need from the soil. And the soil becomes just dirt. It doesn't become alive. So that's totally possible, and they need to do an analysis of what's in your soil. So I suspect for sure that there are many, not even just one, it could be many chemicals in your soil.
Yeah, I think in that case, you've explained that glyphosate has antibiotic effect, right? It could be that it's also killing the good microbes and enabling the survival of the bad microbes. It's not like the plant themselves, they just extract the nutrient from the soil. They are basically feeding off what is being broken down by the microbes in the soil. So this way, if they don't have anything from the microbes, then there's no way the plant is going to survive, right? So thank you for that. So we'll move on to the next question, talking about GMOs and synthetic agrochemicals. So there's this narrative that GMOs and more use of synthetic agrochemicals are important for food security, and especially in highly food insecure places like Africa, facing declining yields, poor soil, accelerated climate change effects. And I'd like to ask you that how true this is. Do you think the conventional farming system does not have more to offer than this novel system? It's always that Africa is using less fertilizer, less pesticide. They have to use more to be more productive, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the argument. They have to incorporate GMO that is crucial to the food security. Africa has high level of food insecurity. Do you think this is true?
Absolutely not. And it's been shown not to be true. It's been shown by many organizations that organic regenerative farming can produce as much as, and most likely way more than, GMO crops. GMO crops require more water, and they require constant chemical inputs. The farmer becomes a slave to the system, and they have to replete the seeds every year. The seeds don't regerminate, and they have to replace them. Not only that, heirloom seeds become useless because they become contaminated. There is a farming group called Regeneration International that is run by a colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Andre Leu from Australia, and he was also co-author of the book we wrote on Africa and pesticides. And there are way over 400 groups that promote organic regenerative farming as the way to restore and reverse this patent trend that we're on. Once these seeds become patented, these companies, whether it's Syngenta, Bayer, ChemChina, whatever chemical companies, they make money on these patents. And so they will do everything they can to keep us on the chemical wheel. So organic regenerative farming is the way. The food is way more nutritious, at least 20%. 1, 2, requires less water than conventional GMO crops. And 3, does not have now this unstudied, no long-term biologic data on the health effects of these genetically modified microbes that we keep referring to, that once they are released, they cannot be recalled. And we don't know the harm that these new microbes will have on the substantial microbes we need in the soil for the plants. They can compete with those and outcompete them. And it can become a biologic disaster. We don't know the can of worms we are opening with this. And there is a scientific arrogance to think that we understand genetic engineering. It is not they tell you it's precise. It's not. When they reorganize these DNA segments from different organisms and kind of toss them together like in a can like this, and then toss them out, the DNA kind of reassembles itself and makes brand new products, hundreds of them, including products that are harmful to us, harmful to plants, harmful to the birds and the bees and the pollinators. So it all becomes part of an ecosystem, right? So you just disrupt one thing on the web and the whole spider web shakes. And that's what we're doing. So if my advice to Nigerians is to please, this money is tainted money. Do not accept these bribes from big ag. Get back to small farming, organic regenerative farming. You can restore chemically contaminated soils in a few years And there are things you can add to the soils to bring them back to health.
Dr. Mitchell, there are a whole lot of implications, future implications here that we don't even understand, right? And if we don't understand this and we are, basically pushing ahead with this, adopting it and pushing it to full-scale adoption, what are we going to be seeing in the future, is unimaginable. So I just want to ask you this follow-up question. How is it that when a correlation is found between some disease and these novel procedures, other than to recall, eradicate the novel procedures, stop them entirely, we think more about modifying the microbes to be able to limit the effect of this genetic modification? Why this? What do you think about this? Is this the right way to go about it?
Yeah, so the genetically modified microbes are being introduced. So there's two ways to think of this. They're being introduced, and because we can doesn't mean we should. And right now it is in the forefront of every lab. They're genetically modified microbes to create these patents, to create new products, right? Every time they create a new product, they can get a patent, which means they can claim it as their own and own the seed, own the product. And so they're all clamoring here in Silicon Valley, which is a big tech hub here in California, to be on the forefront of this. The problem with this whole genetically modified microbe problem is that the DNA is being transferred in a way it's not supposed to be transferred. It's being transferred horizontally. DNA is supposed to be transferred vertically. And what I mean by that if your parents are tall, you'll be born tall. If your parents are short, you're going to be born short. You'll have the genetics transferred. If your parents have, a certain kind of, talent, that will be transferred. But horizontal is the DNA is going sideways instead of vertically. And so plants are able to adopt, they're using yeast, mostly yeast, but some E. coli, some microbes, to create entirely new species that we've never seen before. But what they're not doing is they're not looking for the products, these new species they're making, and they're not doing any health studies on any population, vulnerable children, pregnant women, the elderly, bees, butterflies, etc. So we don't have the data to know. And then what we're doing is here in the US, we're giving it a classification called GROS, generally recognized as safe and substantially equivalent to the organic product, whatever it is we're making. And we're telling companies that they can police themselves. Like, okay, Bayer, you just made this new BT corn. You have to prove, just give us the data that it's safe. We know that the studies for big companies like Monsanto, Bayer, and others were ghostwritten. The paper that everyone uses from the Monsanto study that came out in 2001, 25 years later came out and was shown that it was ghostwritten by Monsanto, and they paid the scientists to write it. So we are all working off of ghostwritten science that is fabricated to create wealthy, patented society. Now, patented money for society. Now, whether you think there is evil motive or not, I can't speak to motives. Like, why are they doing this? Are they trying to kill us all? Is this part of a eugenics movement? I can say so much that I've heard about Bill and the Melissa Gates Foundation, now Bill Gates Foundation, and eugenics. I can't answer the motives, whether it's criminal, satanic, patent, profit. I can't answer all of it, none of it. I don't know. What I can say is this introduction has caused these health effects. I know it from my own clinic, and when I've changed children's diets, they got better. It's called a health outcome. People say these are anecdotes. I've treated thousands of children. I have thousands of anecdotes. I don't need 20 lab rats to show me when I make these interventions, kids get better. Now, but that doesn't hold up. You have to have a paper. So fine, we have papers. We have papers that show 0.1 parts per billion of glyphosate causes, now correlates fatty liver disease in rats using Roundup. We have that paper from King's College in the UK. So maybe I'm a little bit of off topic from your question. I hope I answered it to you. Did I answer your question?
Yes, yes, you did answer it. You did answer it. Thank you. You were advising Africans in Nigeria just back now. I want you to continue on that. Okay. That despite a tortuous complexity that leaves gap in consumer awareness and education and food components regulation in the US, we are seeing private efforts like yours and other researchers, scientists, private individuals who have been able to ensure to some extent exposure, appropriate labeling, and push to enable healthy food provision and decision making. So what could Africa and Nigeria learn from this to bring about change, as there are many food components in use which are dangerous and have either been banned in Nigeria or elsewhere, but are still in use or used or included in proportions considered to be unsafe. For instance, high sugar content in soda, high sodium in noodles, carcinogenic seasoning additives, and food preservatives. So what would be your advice to Africans and Nigerians?
Yes, so I say Africans beware, particularly Nigerians. I saw that your study, if you recall, glyphosate was declared a class 2A carcinogen. That means causes cancer by the World Health Organization, the IARC, in 2015. Your cancer rate in children is going up in Nigeria. We know that you're exposed to Roundup, and not to mention all the other chemicals, very toxic chemicals that work negatively, synergistically with glyphosate, Roundup, and other glyphosate-based herbicides. There are over 800 glyphosate-based herbicides globally. It's the number one herbicide sprayed in the world. Thank you very much, Monsanto Bear. So this would be my advice to Nigeria. Your children are already struggling. I could see it now just from the literature, not from any exposure I've had with your children, just from reading about what's happening in Nigerian children, and your data is not as tight as I would like to see it, is alarming. So this is my advice to people: to remove the chemical additives in your food, to go back to farming. It's not a better farming through chemistry. It's better farming what your mother, perhaps your grandmother, perhaps your grandfather, perhaps your great-grandfather knew and did, is how you treat the soil with natural sustenance, natural ingredients, and organic farming, organic regenerative farming. Get off the chemical wheel would be my advice. Support local farmers, support your local farmers markets, get everyone back in the fields is what I recommend, and move away from the chemical giants that are promoting false narratives, who have big budgets on advertising. They will give you the most beautiful, glossy advertisements telling you how safe it is, but it is honestly mythology. This is not true. We've shown it globally. We have in the US. Our kids are facing a health disaster. Right now in our state of California, 1 in 12.5 boys is now on the autism spectrum. When I first started practicing 43 years ago, it was 1 in 10,000. That's what happened in my lifetime. So unless you want to follow the trajectory of America, I would say change it now while you can, and support those truly green alliances, not the greenwashing from Gates Foundation, the truly green alliances like GMO Free Nigeria Alliance and others, to support your local farmers and get the kids farming. Please teach your children about GMOs, harms from pesticides, and to understand how to do organic regenerative agriculture. It should be at every school, every hospital, every family.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Dr. Mitchell. So let's go to the data part. Much of what we are saying about, the statistics for all these autoimmune disorders, autism spectrum disorder, allergies, asthma, fatty liver disease. When it comes to Africa, Nigeria, there is no concrete data, and in such way, it impacts decision-making, policy effort to actually address these issues on how there is link between some of these novel procedures with the disorders that we are seeing. So my question to you is, how should Africa go about research and data gathering to have detailed data on these issues and their correlation?
Certainly. I would say when it comes to children, we want to employ the precautionary principle. We don't need to bring on the for example, the technology or the chemistry and then see what fallout there is and then study it. We'd say, no, we've got warnings and data from across the US. Look at what's happening here in America to our children. I can give you statistics on every single disease, and it's not good in our children, and how it's directly tied to pesticides. We have so much data, for example, from the study from UC Berkeley I was telling you before, just that alone, 25-year study looking at organophosphate pesticides. So I'd say, and protect Nigerian children via the precautionary principle. Do not release these things and say, oh, look, they caused autism, and then try to recall them. It's much easier to prevent it than to recall it once it's released. Also, it's much easier to chemical farm. You just spray on the weed on a GMO crop, and the weed dies. How easy is that? You can't see the harm it's causing in yourself, in your soil, in the birds and the bees. It's not immediately visible. It may not become visible to your own children, or when your pollinators disappear, like the bee collapse that we have here in the US now. No bees, no honey, no pollination. Agriculture goes right down the tubes. So my suggestion would be for particularly Nigeria, not just Nigeria, Kenya's problem, South Africa's a problem, there are problems throughout Africa, is precautionary principle. Protect your children, and prevention is easier than treatment. It's much better to prevent autism than to treat it.
Thank you so much for that. I'm sure Nigeria audience, you are going to take one or two things from that as soon as this conversation is published. So I go to the last question, and I want you to go on very well on this, asking you that what gives you confidence about Africa that it will be the last bastion for indigenous and uncompromised food system, despite a weak biosecurity system and strong lobby force pushing for a wide-scale adoption and commercialization of GMOs and more use of pesticides?
I have great faith in the people of Nigeria, people of Africa. First of all, you're more than them, you're numbers. Number one. Number two, your culture is tied to the land. So you have a strong, long, organic, regenerative farming history. Organic farming should be normal farming, and chemical farming is the other. All farming should be organic farming with natural organic inputs and not chemical inputs. So you have a tie to the land, you have a spiritual connection to the land, and you have a commitment to the protection of the land. Now, whether you're going to succumb to the big money that's being poured into your countries to entice you to adopt the GMO way because it's better for you, you have many of us, not just me, certainly. There's so many of us saying, no, this is not the better way. And you say, well, why aren't our voices getting out there? Because of censorship. We are small. We are blocked. We're blocked on social media. We're blocked on Amazon. We're blocked on, Facebook. When we start voicing our concerns, the research gets blocked. One researcher from France, Dr. Gilles-Eric Seralini, was the first researcher to report on mammary tumors from Roundup in rats. He got obliterated from reporting this. The first researcher, Dr. Arpad Pusti, who showed harm from GMOs in 1996 to 1998 at the Royal Institute in Scotland, they took him down in 2 days. They fired him, took all his research. They don't want people to know the truth. So they will do everything they can to feed you a mythology to believe this is a better way, better living through chemistry. And what we're telling you, it's a lie. That is very hard to wrap around, because they will entice you with glossy images, beautiful farms and fields in the US, big money, paying off your company, and they will infiltrate your governors and your regulators and your legislators with people from industry. That's how they do it. They have a playbook, and they infiltrate so that the fox is guarding the henhouse.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for that. That was elaborate and constructive step for Africans to think about. And I hope that they are going to do the right thing, embracing what is natural and what is good for health, environment. In fact, and the society and world at large. So I really want to thank you for coming on to today's podcast. It's been very insightful, and seeing how we can bridge learning from the global north and global south, the US, Nigeria, Northern America, Africa. I'm sure that this is going to join the broader discussion to ensure a sustainable and healthy food environmental system. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for what you do for your people, for your country, for your continent. 1, 2, remember, a healthy person has 100 wishes. A sick person has 1 wish, and that's to be healthy. Health trumps all. So I leave that for you, for your people. I also say, please come visit my work, gmoscience.org. And I do the work on behalf of our kids. This is my new book. This is how people can do what I do. If you can't find someone like me, it's on Amazon, and they can buy it on Amazon, or they can get the digital version. But it's basically everything I've learned in 1 book.
I mean, I've read a part of the chapter. Thank you for sending it to me, and it did enlighten me. I wrote an email to you about that. Before I was thinking that allergies were hereditary. I could see that there could be allergy because of some of these biogenetics are causing the blood-brain barrier, also influencing the microbial culture in the gut, affecting the gut health of infants. So infants are having allergies right from the fetus. This is very dangerous, and you just have to read the book and get to know of some other things.